Wait, is Pisco here real quick? If a president gives an illegal order, are the people obeying him also covered by his potential immunity? That was a question that I had that wasn't addressed in here, but I'm curious. Let's say that the president orders somebody to go and commit an illegal act. I order the attorney general, hey, listen, I want to fire this guy beneath me. Can you go slit his throat? Let's say that the guy goes and he does it. Now let's say that that person is taken to court because he murdered somebody. Would the court be able to consider that case if part of the reason why he did it was because he was ordered by the president, but that action is like beyond review? I don't know how that would work. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I heard the bat signal.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a question.
Hit me.
So when we look at decisions and we look at the division of the court, do you think there's a chance that if you changed one justice, this 6-3 decision would change to 5-4 in the other direction? Like, do you think there's a chance that when you look at this, so like, I feel like Barrett's things that she mentions in her concurrence. Okay. The pay must be good. The Destiny reads as boring garbage all day. The courts are 1/3 of the composition of our government. Supreme Court justices are the literal gods that determine how we read the Constitution and how we evaluate the court's role in our government and the other people's roles in government.
I'm sorry. I totally missed everything you just said. Can you say that?
Yeah, you're good. If you think this is boring, then go move to another country. Please leave my country. Okay.
What?
Sorry. Not
I was born here.
No. I wasn't talking to you. Jesus. Sorry.
Okay.
Somebody in chat said this is really boring. And like, these are the Supreme Court justices writing on the foundational aspects of law in your country.
It's your country.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. My question was, if you were to look at the, let's say that you have a ruling that's 6-3, is it possible that if just one judge was swapped out, that ruling could change to 5-4 in the other direction?
If one swapped to the,
like, let's say, for instance,
more of a 5-4 decision.
Yeah, I know. So like when I read like
5-1-3.
Amy's decision, when I read her concurrence, now even though she says concurring and then she disagrees on a little part, I feel like her disagreement there, in my mind, would be enough for you to reject the entire ruling. You wouldn't agree. You would dissent, and this would be the reason why. Do you think that if there was one more liberal on the court, you swap out a conservative with a liberal, that Amy would join the dissenters and you would have instead of a 6-3 in one direction, you'd have a 5-4 in the opposite direction? Is that possible? Do you think that's possible?
I think that it would be a situation like the Affordable Care Act case, where you would have a controlling opinion that is Amy Coney Barrett's. She writes for the court because hers is the most narrow.
Oh, okay.
And what would happen is you would still have the result of Donald Trump is not.
Yeah, I understand.
Like his case isn't
You'd have a
happening.
5-4 decision, but instead of Amy concurring, she'd write the majority opinion, and then you get a concurrent by one of these other crazy judges, and they'd say, "Well, we agree with Amy. We actually think it should go way. I think it should go way further."
So her thing would probably be more narrow, and probably the liberals would agree to go with that instead of the if that were the world, right? It would fashion an opinion in such that she would have the say in terms of what the rule would be to be applied. Sure. And her opinion is what I expected this court to rule. I actually did not expect. I expected them to have it so Trump would not be tried before the election. I expected them to give some immunity, but I did not expect them to go as far as they did in the majority opinion. The majority opinion is unhinged. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane. And just to address some of these stupid comments that I keep seeing about the Obama drone strike. The next time I hear about the Obama drone strike, I'm going to drone strike you, okay?
Oh,
because
shit.
This entire hypothetical is so stupid, right? Think about what we're talking about here. Obama, even if you believe, right, that he intentionally killed an innocent American citizen, there is at least a doctrine of justification that could be applied to that action, right? You would say, applying whatever principles that the court wants to fashion about justification. Think about like a cop situation, right? Where if a cop goes and if there's a car speeding about to crash into a bunch of pedestrians, the cop is entitled to use authorized force, even though it's like risky, right? And it might kill an innocent person. those kinds of principles are things that we apply in our courts all the time.
Yeah, and the
That,
principle,
like-
yeah, and for the president explicitly, it was called out in one of these things. I don't remember what the thing was called, but like if the president confers with the legal counsel or whatever, and the legal counsel like gives the go ahead, then the idea that you would even have like the mens rea component there for the crime of just murdering somebody when he's literally being counseled by one of the most authoritative, like legally interpreted bodies in the in the fucking country just wouldn't even make sense. Yeah, it's
also if you have
nonsense.
if you don't know he's there, right? Like there could be a question about whether or not it's an on purpose killing of an innocent American, or whether or not there's another purpose to the killing. And that's all to say you can apply regular criminal principles and principles related to justification and use of force that we use literally for self-defense for normal citizens. But obviously people who are in the government have greater ranges of justification that they are able to have. That's not immunity, that's just justification. But try to think about the other world. What the court just said is, if Obama, without justification, intentionally and maliciously killed an American citizen, it is absolutely immune. That's what you're saying. Those of you saying, well, what if Obama immunized for what he did with the drone strikes? What you are conceding implicitly is that if in bad faith, Obama intentionally killed a political rival while they were out and about and doing a foreign trip somewhere and just drone strike them without justification, without any question about whether or not it was reckless. He even says directly, like, to let's say to his general, I did this action for political benefit because I wanted to kill the other person in office. There's just no way you can touch that. And I challenge anyone who's supporting this rule, any conservative, lawyer who's saying it's not a big deal, to come out and talk about it, because you will look like an idiot and a fool, like you haven't read the opinion whatsoever. And we can invent 1,000 of these hypotheticals.
Yeah.
And none of them will be able to be answered.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't understand at all how the like you can. I disagree with Amy's opinion, but I could steelman that one. I can't steelman the majority opinion. I think it is way, way, way too ridiculous.
It's nuts.
Yeah,
and just Jackson has the right view of what immunity is versus regular criminal defenses. Immunity doesn't mean anything if it doesn't protect criminal or illegal or unconstitutional things, right? Like the way people try to get out of that is like, well, murder is not protected. It's not a duty of the president to murder or assassinate. No. You're begging the question, right? Murder implies something is malicious and without justification, because that's baked into the definition of murder.
Yeah.
What we're saying is that the use of force, you can't even look into the motive.
Yeah.
You can't even look into the intent. You can't even look at all, it's a use of force. And if we could plausibly link it to a core executive power, you're going to tell me that the president as a core executive power doesn't have the authority to arrest people or to kill people? I'll
push back even a little bit on that, because I don't think that it's even if it's manifestly a core power. The thing that Robert sets out over and over again is that whatever you want to review, the ability to review this thing, like, cannot pose, it can pose no dangers of intrusion on the authority and functions of the executive branch. No dangers of intrusion on the authority and functions of the executive branch. And that's for stuff that's like presumed immune. For the absolute immune stuff, you're just fucked. That's not even, this is for the presumed immune stuff. So even the presumed immune stuff, it feels like, how do you argue against anything being not that, right? Like the example that I gave at the end here was a president himself could make that determination. Let's say, for instance, 100%. Let's say that a president wants to assassinate a political opponent. Let's say that the president goes on TV and the president says something where he's like, man, I need to be able to operate these drones without the criminal justice system breathing down my neck, okay? And then let's say that he says on TV, also, I'm going to drone strike, the entire Democratic Party because fuck this shit. And then he drone strikes them all, and then it gets challenged in the court. Well, obviously, anything involving a president is probably going to work its way up to the Supreme Court. And now the Supreme Court is looking at it and saying, well, the standard that we've kind of developed, if you even call it a standard, is that anything that we review can't have any intrusion on the authority of function of the executive branch. And this guy literally said this would intrude on his ability to function as the executive. And if the president himself says it, then it must be true about this. So like, fuck, we can't review the entire action. Like, it's just so...
under the broad chilling framework they've established, if they can just invent a hypothetical which is like, oh my God, what would happen? What would happen if we were in these situations and you could question the president's discretion on who he characterizes as a terrorist or not. Think about this situation. For those of you who question whether the president has the authority to kill people in certain circumstances, think about this situation. There's a plane with a bomb, strapped with a bomb, coming towards the new World Trade Center in New York. And it's getting close there. Do you think that the president has the authority to order either his military or law enforcement to shoot down that plane? Not arrest, to kill everyone on that plane. Do you think he has that authority? The answer is obvious. Of course, under certain circumstances, presidents have use of force authority. Yeah. Likewise, this court goes out of its way to say the executive branch is a branch unto themselves. If anyone in the executive branch has the authority to kill someone, by definition, the president has the authority, because the authority only emanates from him, right? Like, think about this. It's just like 1 + 1 = 2. The president is the executive branch. If anyone in the executive branch has the power to arrest, by definition, the president has the power to arrest. By definition, he has the power to use force, with either himself or to order it, because the executive branch can't contain more authority than the president has under their framework of what the unitary executive theory is. There's no good argument against this. I challenge any of these dummies, or including but not limited to Ben Shapiro.
Also, wait, hold on. I just want to say something. Somebody in Kick Chat says the context matters on an official act. An act is considered. Okay, everything you say past it. No, it doesn't. You're wrong. You're dead fucking wrong. The context does not matter. You can't even consider the context. You're completely and utterly and totally incorrect. Roberts and the entire majority disagrees with you. You're just completely and totally wrong.
I have a question, Pisco.
Yeah.
All right. How you doing? So I'm doing all right, my dude. Looking forward to our show later today. That should be fun.
I've been better.
Yeah, that's true. I've been updating my passport, looking into all sorts of different.
No, you can't say that. This is our country. We got to defend it. We have to protect it. But I understand the sentiment.
I can vote by mail if I live somewhere
no,
else.
No, we have to be
international voters. Anyway, so question, Pisco. So my understanding, there's kind of like 3 main points of this ruling. I talked to Rob Noor about it, which was like impossible to have.
Big mistake. He's a dumbass who I'm sure has not read this opinion.
Ooh.
Well, yeah. Well, he actually admitted to not reading the opinion, which made his very strong opinion kind of ironic. But anyway, so there's kind of like 3 main parts. So one is that motivations don't matter. So if the president intends to fuck his political opponents over, it doesn't really matter in terms of determining whether or not it's an official act.
I'm going to have a key distinction right there. Okay. Motive is not necessarily intent under the criminal law, but I just want to be clear.
I've heard this before, but I don't
know. No, I understand, but I want to put to bed this notion that intent is not covered, because the court specifically says you can't look into whether it's a sham. And I think sham and motive safely encompass the kind of inquiry we're speculating here about intent. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and with regard to the second thing, I think one thing they said was that courts can't evaluate whether or not the action breaks an understood statute. So essentially, like, even if the president's order breaks a law in some ordinary sense, that's not necessarily justification for saying it's not an official act either.
Oh, no. That is the point of this, Econoboy. Like, people think about this. People are like, you can't violate the Post-Comitas Act, or you can't violate because it says here you're not supposed. No, guys, the whole point of an immunity doctrine is to protect you from illegal accusations of illegality or criminality. The immunity doctrine wouldn't make sense if it only applied to legal things, guys.
Yes.
Just use your head for a second.
All legal actions that if a public official is required in the course of duty to discharge a certain action, that's going to supersede any type of law that's made, right? Like you can't kidnap somebody, right? But you can't take a police officer to court for kidnapping you if it's in the service of his job.
Right. Stephen, think about it like this. Like,
exactly.
Does it make sense to have an immunity doctrine that's like tailored to the, I'm immune for everything legal? That doesn't make sense. It's by definition going to include,
and it has never been like extended to a single person in the history of this country in this manner ever. Like never, to no U.S. citizen ever. The only thing even remotely approaching this would be something like diplomatic immunity, which has more to do with international stuff. It doesn't apply to U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. There's nothing that is in the history of all of the U.S. that has been done like this.
All right. So the third, exactly. So motivations don't matter. Whether or not it's breaking law doesn't matter. And then the third thing, which seems important, is what you guys were just talking about, which is that, well, essentially any ruling with regard to the limitation of executive function can't do that, right? Like you can't rule anything not an official act or whatever if it might intrude on executive function or the ability for the executive to do anything within its responsibilities, right?
Yep.
That's like the third big piece. And so my question is one hypothetical that I think is maybe more practical. Like I know a lot of people are talking about what if they order the assassination of their political opponents. I think something that's much more practical if we think about like especially like Donald Trump is what if he just orders the IRS to like audit every single one of his political opponents?
Well, I brought that up
right?
with Obama. That would be, that act would have been beyond review. But also,
be careful.
The question for Pisco is like if Trump said I'm like okay I'm gonna audit Joe Biden and every one of his family members because fuck him, they did it to me, they're pieces of shit, and then I don't know, let's say that there's some sort of obviously there'd be some sort of legal case about this, like how could it possibly be the case that the court rules this isn't an official act while at the same time ruling that the president can't control the IRS and like order audits on people? It seems like you would just necessarily lead to this like infinite regress of enforcement where at the end of the day, the president ultimately, constitutionally, like whatever, according to the court, has to be in charge of the IRS. But at the same time, it's not like you can rule that the president can't order an audit of someone if that's the case, because you're limiting the president's authority over executive members, right? So how would you? It seems like this opinion would necessarily allow for the politicization of basically all law enforcement and I guess IRS. You could think of as law enforcement as well.
It does, but just be careful because the doctrine is criminal immunity. And so there is no generalized criminal statute that if you break the law, it's criminal, right? So violating the Constitution or violating a statute or violating the principles of whatever thing the IRS isn't necessarily a criminal law. Now, you could imagine that Congress passes a statute that says political prosecutions as defined like this is a crime under this section and therefore or I don't know, they could come up with a law that says if you intentionally and knowingly violate the Constitution, using the channels or instrumentalities of interstate commerce, you have committed a crime or something like that. There's no like general, well, if you intentionally violate the law, you do a crime. So the IRS thing, it probably wouldn't be a crime right now unless you did like some kind of false representation or some kind of perjury or something like that. But if you're just blatantly politically going after people, I would agree that this probably would even now not be a crime, or even before this ruling not be a crime, just because I don't know of any criminal statute that like criminalizes political prosecutions. But the point is, like, oftentimes in those schemes, there are attendant crimes, there are falsifications, there are like perjury things, there are obstruction, that kind of thing. And also, you could use evidence of that for like other crimes, right? And so, Congress conceivably, if it wanted to, could criminalize those kinds of situations. One example that I often use is like, yes, now what they've said is that if the president were to order the prosecution of people just because they're black, understanding that maybe there's not a criminal law against that right now, but suppose that Congress wanted to make a criminal law against racially enforced policing, you couldn't apply that and even question the decision of any prosecution brought by the president of the United States or encouraged by the president. So I don't know if that answered. And it's the same thing, because I saw your kind of thing about the student loan stuff. Well, there's no crime for intentionally violating the statute when you're trying to discharge loans, right? That is not by itself a criminal act, but it could be. You could think of them making a law like that. There's other things I have to say about why I think we should consider the court's principles and dealing with non-criminal type situations, but I'll let you respond to that.
But I guess that's the scary part, right? And that's what I thought about as well. Is like, okay, in theory, the court, the court or like Congress, when seeing this kind of thing, could obviously pass a bill that sort of specifically carves out, hey, this specific action is illegal, or maybe adding some broad statutes about, the political motivations of executive acts or whatever it is, right?
Wait, hold on, just real quick. The legislature cannot do that now. After this ruling, if it applies to the president.
They can.
The legislature has lost the ability to criminally regulate the president's behavior now, because as long as the court determines that it's a core activity or that the criminalizing of said thing would intrude on the executive's powers, the legislature has completely lost that ability to have any
as a
criminal
categorical matter.
Categorical.
Oh, right, but that's
you don't look at the facts of the specific.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm saying, is that when people say, this this turns us into, Hungarian democracy or like, a Russian style sort of casino capitalist, oligarchic system. I don't know how else to read that, right? Because this ruling seems to imply that basically the president could openly politically prosecute his opponents, and the legislature can't do anything about it, and it's not clear that the courts could do anything about it.
Well, no, the courts do. The courts
Supreme
can.
Court.
Now you have the court. The Supreme Court is the most important factor now in holding a president criminally liable, because ultimately the Supreme Court is going to be the one deciding if an act is official or not. So now when you pick your Supreme Court justices, you better be fucking sure how they feel about what's a crime or what's not.
It also goes beyond the concept of just as far as official powers in regards to criminality too. This also now begins to permeate into the administrative state where, you have general principles of regulatory agencies and stuff like that, especially in light of Chevron being doused, as well as the challenge limitations on statute of limitation. So anytime a court finds that something is a core presidential power when it comes to regulatory authority, it now ports over to
the criminal context.
The criminal context as well.
That's what I'm curious about, is like, even a case like I'm describing got up to the Supreme Court, assuming that the court remains its current composition for at least a little while, presuming it'll stay the same, or they'll just be replaced by similarly ideological people. I'm not really sure how the Supreme Court could, referencing their own logic in the decision, I don't know how they could rule that something like a politically motivated mass auditing of my opponents is not an official act. Like, it seems like I don't know how they could.
They kind of can't. That's the point.
I want to give you an example of how that would play out in the real world, right? So
all right, give me one.
You have the President of the United States. He orders the political audits of his opponents. In order to do that, practically, there's going to have to be people who are going to have to do that, right? And they're going to have to enact that politicization. And this, by its terms, this opinion doesn't cover them. But just think about this, right? The president does that and orders IRS people directly or DOJ people to explicitly to be political. And then the people on the ground start doing that. And so someone sues in court. It's like, wait, this violates due process. It violates equal protection clause. You can't do this. It's illegal. And the court says, yes, you're right. This is not a criminal remedy. It's a civil one. And so we're going to issue a court order, and it's going to prevent all IRS members from doing what we're talking about right now. And so court order, these IRS members are not allowed to do these political prosecutions. You must stop. And a theoretical President Trump says, no, continue. Don't worry. If you disobey this order from the court, I'll just pardon you. That's contempt of court of the federal court. It's a court order.
I'll fire you if you don't listen.
And if you don't listen, I'll fire you. But if you do, don't worry. I'll have a pardon every single day. I'll have a blanket pardon for what you're doing. And now the court, who is loath, by the way, the court is loath ever to officially enjoin or issue an injunction against the president in his official capacity. Typically what you'll see is, and eSports Batman can back this up, what courts will do is if the president has some kind of illegal program, they'll enjoin the agency. They won't ever enjoin the person of the president. They'll issue an injunction against the agency. But now we're in a situation where, okay, the court, its order is not being listened to. It's unable, the state is unable, or I guess the federal government is unable to bring contempt proceedings against these people because the current president keeps pardoning them. And so now they issue an injunction against the president and say, you must stop trying to obstruct our contempt of court proceedings and stopping the enforcement of law. Oops, sorry, court. After, right? I understand the president is not amenable to suit typically as understood by the DOJ now anyway, but even in future proceedings, he has no incentive not to say court fuck off, because also, he can never be held accountable.
Yeah, also, hold on, because you're going to hear this argument a lot, and I see a lot of fucking retards in chat saying this, okay? People keep saying impeachment. Impeachment is not designed to hold somebody accountable for criminal actions. Impeachment is only designed to remove an elected official from office and prevent them from holding future office. That's all impeachment does. Full stop, period.
It does not strip immunity, retroactively. So if you impeach a president, they're still covered.
Immune, yeah.
Right.
Which, by the way, Trump's counsel was arguing that, okay, fine. If you want to sue a president for something, you got to impeach him first, at least. Because Penn Shapiro, and I'm going to go over his video, people keep saying that the court didn't go as far as Trump's counsel was acting. That's bullshit. Trump's counsel was readily admitting, using a really stupid reading of, I think it was one of the Article 2 clauses, the one that says that after an impeachment nevertheless, you may, the impeachment, at least Trump's counsel was like, well, fine, if you want to sue him for a court power, at the very least, he needs to be impeached first. But Roberts threw that out. It doesn't matter if you impeach him for a particular action. You still can't sue him for it. It's like unquestionable by any judge.
Well, not even that. It gets pretty bad because when you look at where this is going to go, because there's going to be a natural extension and evolution of this. And what it is going to be that executive agencies are going to claim that same immunity, the same as the president, by saying, oh, well, we're just acting as an extension of the president, right?
I 100% agree.
The president has given me an order to do something. He cannot physically complete it himself. But but I am doing it for him as if he were to physically do it himself. Therefore, I am acting as the executive. Therefore, or on
someone will raise that argument. Someone will raise, and by the way, logically and doctrinally, it makes total sense. Yep. It makes total sense. If you consider the president the person of the executive, then everyone under him, by definition, is just an extension of his own authority. If he gives an order to a person, why wouldn't anyone acting sort of under the authority of the president also get the benefits of that? Why would it logically they not be immune? I don't understand.
Even on impeachment as well. I mean, I'm sure that there are certain things that Trump could do with this newfound immunity that would even inspire the most cowardly of Republican senators to vote to convict him in the Senate. But something like I'm describing, honestly, I think if Trump ordered a full forensic audit for like every single member of like the Democratic caucus in the Senate and the House and Biden's family and Kamala's family, something like that, I don't think he would get convicted in the Senate. Like, it would be a very surprising outcome if you.
Are you asking if MAGA under any circumstances would impeach and remove the
president?
president?
That's the problem when people say, there's always impeachment, and it's like, well, guys, we're kind of we're thinking not necessarily rationally, but we're thinking that Republicans have some greater sense of duty other than that to Donald Trump, which does not appear to be true.
Also, hold on. I'm sorry. Fuck the chilling effect on the president's executive power if we were to pass this. Imagine that you are in the Senate and it's up for you, and now you have to decide, am I about to vote to convict the guy who has unlimited criminal immunity, who is also the commander-in-chief and is the executive of every single one of our... Am I going to vote to convict this dude who will never stand trial for something? Like, ooh, that's a rough one.
Well, exactly. And there's an example that I was talking about with some other lawyers yesterday, which could be super memey, which is that you can go basically on a crime spree. One of the examples that we talked about was the idea of, okay, similar to instructing the IRS to audit your political enemies, what if you were to sit there and instruct the IRS to promulgate a regulation that made it impossible for the IRS to audit or review your taxes as president for the duration of your office and for the 10 years following?
Or all your political donors who donated to you. Don't audit any of those guys, right? Yeah. Because they're my buddies.
Yeah, you could literally enrich yourself. You could take bribes for pardons and for commutations. And
also, as a real quick thing, because I see Uncivil Law is bringing this up in chat. Uncivil Law said the majority opinion did not rule on the issue of immunity if there is impeachment first. They did. Roberts he got rid of that argument. He said it was a dumb argument. It's here. I've got it up on stream. You can go and Control F impeachment. But Roberts spoke about this and they dismissed that argument. They said it was a bad argument.
He might be referencing whether or not you're still liable to prosecution after impeachment and removal. But they did. They're nothing by their terms.
Yeah. What do you think absolute means?
Yes.
It's what is that by definition? Yeah.
But just to be clear, you would still be chilled by the things that they're talking about if there was a way to indict you over them. Why would the chilling effect not be present if in the impeachment context? It would still be there, that you could be indicted. So the rationale of this court is all incentive structures and chilling. That's it. And so what you're saying, by the way, is blatantly rejected by the court. So number one, it's clear you haven't had a close reading of the opinion.
Jesus.
You didn't have it yesterday whenever we spoke about it, and you don't have it now. And number two, it's so obvious if you look at the actual logic of the argument without even reading the specific parts that contradict it. You know that the incentive structure would still be there for chilling, quote unquote chilling.
Yeah.
if he could be impeached and removed and then indicted. So it just doesn't make any sense.
Pisco, can you guys clarify one thing? Because you were talking about the relationship between the president and like executive agencies, and that's actually why I popped in. What about the president taking action which is explicitly prohibited? So, like, for example, my understanding is most executive branch employees have employee protections. Could the president fire basically someone who's not an at-will employee? Like, does this like unfettered Supreme Court opinion, would it permit like a President Trump from firing career civil servants who otherwise have employee protections, or no?
Indirectly, yes.
Why not?
So technically, the cases that provide for certain levels of layers of protection for people in certain places. So there's some case law about there being certain people who are not fireable by the president. Technically, this case did not explicitly overturn them, but it strongly suggested that the president is the unitary executive, and it talked about how broad his the removal power was broad enough to justify
Wait back 1 second.
the criminal activities of Trump vis-a-vis the election. And so why wouldn't it cover like the basic firing of an inferior officer?
So let me give you an example on that one. The easiest way would be, for instance, for the president to revoke a security clearance of some employee, right? The president would, of course, argue from a national security standpoint that it is obviously within their purview as the head of the executive for national security reasons that they get to determine who is fit and who is not for government employment. And upon a review that the government or that the president initiated against a particular employee, they found they're no longer suitable. That's not going to be challengeable under any circumstances. It's pretty hard to do it even before this opinion. If an agency finds you not suitable, but now it's kind of like that's the core security function of the president. You're not going to be able to touch that.
Yeah. So, well, the reason I ask is because I know a major element of Trump's agenda, if he were to get reelected, is he's trying to make as many executive branch employees at will as possible.
Yeah, Schedule F.
Schedule F.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, let's say that notwithstanding, could the president could not be held accountable if he attempted an unlawful discharge of an executive branch employee.
Yes.
Right.
I don't think that's a direct implication of this case. I think it's just where the court's at. So like this case indicates a humongous deference to the president with respect to the removal power. It implies a great deal of deference. It doesn't explicitly change the fact, but my intuition is even without this ruling, the court would approve whatever that is.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. So like,
and the other thing is, if the Schedule F stuff does go through for 2020 Project 2025, those become political positions, which means he can fire at will. There's no protections for those employees anymore, because they're political appointees and they serve at the pleasure of the president.
Yeah, I think about the one curious thing about this that I'm curious about is like the mechanical power of the president seems pretty. It seems like the mechanical power would almost be absolute. What I mean by that is like take for instance these at-will employees that have some sort of protections, right? In theory, from just getting fired willy-nilly by the president. Like even if the court were to come in and rule, oh well, you can't fire them. I feel like the president could just say, okay, well I'm gonna order my my personnel management office to just not process any payments to any of these employees anymore, or something like that, right? You could just make their lives so miserable and encourage so much turnover naturally that what are you going to do, right? It seems.
I hear you. I think that a lot of these are just where the court's at in terms of executive authority. I do think it's so good, Josiah and others, that you guys are thinking about the broader implications of the court's rationale, because that's what people have just failed to do. People fail to engage with what the court's logic, and they did it with the Dobbs decision. They're like, no, don't worry, this won't touch any other rights. You guys sure about that? You sure about that? Really?
Especially when they went through during oral arguments and specifically said, we want to go after Obergefell, we want to go after, Connecticut, we want to go after.
Don't believe them. Opinions and logic of courts have a way of getting out of hand in this of the specific case. It's notable, right, that Roberts literally has the opportunity to address Sotomayor's hypotheticals, the extreme hypotheticals. He referenced them in the opinion. He answers other hypotheticals, by the way. That he does not have a problem talking about hypotheticals in the decision at all. So he had the opportunity to address those hypotheticals. He references them, and do you know what he says in response? He doesn't say anything substantive. He just says what's more likely than those extreme hypotheticals is the chilling effect of this on the executive power. That's conceding the hypotheticals, folks. So anyone who tells you that the SEAL Team 6 hypos are off the menu, they're on the menu, folks. They're on the menu. That's exactly what this opinion does. And I will debate any conservative lawyer from here to Alaska who says otherwise. And if you guys are talking big on Twitter and you think that, oh, you guys are all dumb, that this is extreme hypotheticals, no, it is 100% the holding of this court, and I'll fight to the death on it.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think the saddest thing
Stephen, do
about
you
this,
agree? Well, hang on, just out of curiosity, Stephen, in your reading of it, do you agree that there is no? I didn't see any implication of any sort of like limiting principle on this.
I think he stepped away, Josiah.
Oh, he
from
did.
the- It's
Oh.
just us entertaining the chat now.
Yeah, I think the saddest thing about this opinion is that much of the fear, as far as the executive, being chilled or whatever, has already been dealt with through the myriad of decision making that has come through over the years for the general national security and executive power concerns, but also through Congress's own legislation, right? The Congress can always legislate specific authority to the president and then just sit there and say this is part of their presidential duty and give them qualified immunity based off that. There's no need to go with this huge, broad, sweeping, philosophy that takes power from the legislature and invests it exclusively in the hands of the judiciary. Like it doesn't.
Why are you
make
talking
sense.
about qualified immunity?
Well, because the president acting as, say, for instance, commander in chief or things like that would be incidental to his need, similar to your argument of shooting the planes down that were loaded with the bombs, where it would be like, okay, this is a natural responsibility of the presidency. We see this under the national security paradigm that the executive has that responsibility to protect us. Therefore, taking action like this is understandable.
Isn't that the public official exemption or whatever that they mention in the opinion? Where like I think Sotomayor says like even if there were no immunity whatsoever, which was the lower court's opinion, a president who would be potentially prosecutable has so many protections, like again, the
Yes,
presumption of
correct.
innocence, and then he
That's-
also says
yeah.
you can appeal to the public authority exemption, like a cop breaking the speed limit in a high speed pursuit.
Well,
So I
it's
think-
also given what Pisco was also saying, where it's like the president in the discharge of their duties, as is constitutionally obligated or required of them, is lawful by its nature. It's not unlawful. So again, this is where I'm kind of hearkening back to that to be like, if the president's doing their job or what is expected to, under their job, then they're not doing anything necessarily illegal. And if you want specific authority to do something, to have it, concrete in stone that this is lawful and this is an exercise of one specific power of the executive, just ask the legislature for it. They'll give it to you and then you have it, and it becomes sort of like qualified immunity, where it's like we have examples that are okay and examples that are not okay that we can readily refer to. It would just be in the form of legislation.
I called you on qualified immunity not because I think that what you're saying substantively doesn't make like sense, that Congress can fill the gaps to the extent that we feel that certain exceptions are made. They can write it in their laws 100%. I think that's essentially what you were saying. But anyone who, I only called it as a way to bring attention to the fact that the doctrines of qualified immunity for police officers and the doctrines of absolute immunity in the context of civil damages for judges and prosecutors and the president under Nixon, that has nothing to do until now with the criminal immunity that was being argued by Trump. And so the people who are saying, for example, oh, this is a nothing burger ruling because it's always had immunity. No, this is like such a sea change, so different, so extreme. And anyone who tells you otherwise is lying directly to your face, either intentionally or because they listened to it from Ben Shapiro or some other dumbass.
Well,
And
do you
to-
think like Pisco, I have a question. Do you think that because Roberts early on in his opinion, he writes something along the lines of, the dissent they're really overreacting. All we did, guys, was say that the president can talk to his attorney general, and that's fine. And we said the lower court's got to figure out what an official act is. That's all we did, guys.
He's being
Like, I don't
dishonest.
think Roberts, right? Like, it
That's-
seems like
that's
Roberts isn't a
patently
dumbass,
wrong.
right? Like, it seems like he's actively like trying to
Roberts
downplay the
writes
decision.
some of the worst opinions always. He is a bad writer. He makes bad law. So he did a horrible job in the Anderson case. That majority opinion which everyone kind of attributes to him, even though it was technically per curiam, was horribly written, and this is horribly written, and it gets the law wrong. And so I have no confidence in his ability to make good rules and just look at this. It's a mess. You don't even need to read the dissent to look at like the mess he and others on the court have created with this doctrine that they pulled out of thin air. I mean, it's a mess, and no one will know how to apply it, and it's going to lead to practical immunity for everything, if not. And by the way, guys, all these criminal cases have huge holes in them now. I think that there's a 90% chance they're going to overturn the New York conviction.
Yep.
90%.
They relied too much on advisors and other official sources.
This court bet on it, even though all that action there is unquestionably private. Because it involves some communications with like some, I guess, technically government officials. Expect this Supreme Court to overturn that conviction.
If Biden ordered the same things that we're just talking about, if Biden ordered that every single conservative justice is immediately going to be forensically audited and they're going to be followed around by 3 FBI agents perpetually and their phones are going to be tapped, how do you think the court would, like, do you think they would actually hold true to their logic, or they would find
mental
some
gymnastics
way?
it to say it's unofficial, and with probably Samuel Alito doing his best John Wick impression at the White House.
But those aren't crimes, right? So tapping without a warrant, where is that a crime, right? If you order,
well, that would be surreptitious. That would be.
I guess, right? Yeah.
I'd love to see the court figure out a way to get out of that one.
But like, what the court would say, if he orders his FBI to do it, I don't see what's the problem.
They'd find a way.
They didn't say about Democrats.
And we were talking earlier about like, well, what about the criminal liability for the subordinates? The following things I have to give to you. Number one is you could argue that the act itself, if you take this unitary view seriously, that the court is espousing, that the act itself is an extension of the presidential power, which itself is subject to absolute immunity for those certain things, and then the presumptive immunity for the other things. So that's number one. Number two, obviously the pardon to the extent there's federal crimes. Number three, think about state crimes. Well, wait, hang on. The president can't pardon state crimes. You can't do that. Okay, take it one additional step. If the president gives an order to a subordinate, let's say, for example, he orders an FBI agent, go shoot that terrorist over there. We've done an investigation. We know he's about to set off a bomb. And the FBI agent, in relying on the president's determinations, right? The FBI, let's assume he's in good faith. The FBI agent is following what the president says. The president said, we made an investigation. The president says, I've personally determined that this person is about to blow up a building. I need you to take the shot right now. And he takes a shot. Turns out that was Baby Pelosi. And it was absolutely no threat. It was totally done in bad faith. Can you charge anyone with murder? And even let's say that he behaved recklessly, so you can charge, even though it was intentional, you can charge him with some kind of manslaughter charge or something there. Well, he was following an order by the President of the United States. Why wouldn't that be preempted? Why wouldn't the state prosecution of a federal agent following an order, a lawfully given order, given the immunity doctrine by the President of the United States, why would that not preempt under the Supremacy Clause of the United States any enforcement of state law against that prosecution? So like think about the example where this actually was a terrorist and the state governor or prosecutor is like, for some reason, crazy and wants to charge this guy with murder, even though it was like an actual terrorist who was threatening the thing. Yeah. The first thing that agent would do is bring up the fact that this was an order and say that this was, you can't charge me with this. It's preempted by federal law, by the supremacy of federal law. And I think that's a really strong argument, in fact. So this immunity argument can blow up real quickly when you let it, given all the tools.
He can really shoot somebody dead on Fifth Avenue.
100% he could. 100%.
Pisco, this is why I'm saying we got to update our passports. We got to get out. We're going to be putting.
No.
I already got mine.
No, because the truth is, the world is watching as America is slowly eroding the checks on the president's power. First, what happened was the Congress failed us. The Congress failed us because it did not impeach and remove Donald Trump when it could have. The courts are failing us. The court could have ruled as it should have that Donald Trump committed an insurrection, engaged in insurrection. Keep in mind, the court only ruled in that instance that you couldn't enforce it. They never actually ruled whether he did or not. But it said no. So the court has failed us. Now, the court has additionally laid this open path for the president to use his authority however he wants. The checks on the president are going away. There is one final check. that we have to play this November, and that's the people. And you all know that nobody's afraid, whether it's Joe Biden or any other Democratic candidate, of abusing this new criminal immunity. They're not scared of it. The conservatives are not upset. They're not scared about this ruling at all because they know that the Democratic candidates won't abuse it.
Right.
And
It's
we
a
know
tacit,
who will.
it is a tacit concession to the idea that Biden is some power hungry sociopath. The fact that they're not terrified of this. That's another thing that you should point out anytime that a Republican or MAGA supporter is like, Biden's a fascist, Biden's a real tyrant. It's like, no, motherfucker, if that were true, you would be quaking in your boots at the outcome of this.
Right. Well, that's one thing that I don't know. I hope that's one of the reasons why something like ordering the auditing of like every conservative Supreme Court justice, it's like I feel like something like that could be valuable for Biden to do, if only for the reason that it would really test the logic of the Supreme Court's like decision here. It's just such a crazy decision that it's hard to imagine that they would actually.
I don't know
end
that
up
it meaningfully
enforcing it,
does,
though.
and I think it causes a lot of other problems because it removes the kind. What you're saying is explicitly going after the judges, and even though I agree this court is out of control,
It's legal.
once you cross
allowed to
that
do it.
line, well, I don't think it's legal. Just because there's no criminal punishment
Well, there's no
for
consequences
the
for
president doesn't mean that
doing
it's still legal, right? Like it's unconstitutional for the president to order a black person arrested on the basis of their race. The Equal Protection Clause prevents that, but what they're saying is you can't touch the president even when he violates the Constitution.
Right.
I mean, that's really what it's saying.
There's no
The
consequences to
quintessential
doing anything.
example. I mean, the quintessential example is the ACA, right? Right now, where they lowered the penalties this year, it's technically illegal to not have some sort of health insurance. But what is the penalty? It's $0.00. So effectively, is it really a law?
Well, right. That's why this ruling is so scary, and that's why, like, I'm not even talking about going after the conservative justices in some sense. Like, I'm talking about like in a genuine sense. I want to test this logic as early as possible, right? Because
Why
it
with
does
this
seem
court?
like
Why do you want to test it with these guys? You trust these guys to?
well, because I mean, Pisco, it's like the perfect case. It's like, are you really gonna like literally 180 your brain like you
Yes,
invert
they
a
will.
sphere? Are you somehow gonna find a way to say
Yes,
you
they'll
can't
find
order
a way to
political
invalidate
auditing?
whatever Biden did, and they'll find a way to make it so that they distinguish it, right?
Well, if that's the case, though, if they really did that, that would just go. I think that would just go to what would I have to assume to be a further radicalization of elected Democrats on things like packing the Supreme Court. Like if the Supreme
Yes.
Court continues down this road, I just can't imagine the very next time that we have a Democratic majority in both houses and Democratic president. Okay, well now we have to pack the court. You've made us do this because you've made the president a dictator, and we only have this narrow avenue of actually doing something about it. Because the next time a president is elected and they're one of these sociopathic Republican candidates like Ron DeSantis or Ted Cruz or Vivek fucking Ramaswamy or some shit, like
you don't have to convince me.
what are you
Come on,
gonna do?
I've been in favor of expanding the court since Garland's seat.
There is a
I've been
way
in
to
favor
do
since
this.
2017.
It's
Can
no,
I
I
ask
know,
you
but
guys-
I'm saying I think because there's a lot of Democratic U.S. senators who for a long time have said, oh, well, that's just a step too far. We just can't do that. The court is sacred. And it's like, well, they just
They're
made the
mouthing
president a
off because
dictator.
of elections. They're
Right.
mouthing off because of elections. They know they don't have the power. If they did, they might.
Yeah.
Can I ask you
know.
guys like a question? I'm just super curious your thoughts because I feel like as an outsider when I listen to all this, how do you guys balance like Chevron, which feels like it was pulling back some level of executive power with now the Trump indictment case that's up in, and then connect that to as well. I'm not curious if you guys are thinking about Project 2025 as well. Like, how do you guys kind of like when I hear about all these things going on at once, they feel very tied together because it's all about executive power. And I feel like I'm getting tugged back and forth.
Yeah. So Chevron, you could think that as the court, you can think of both these cases the following through line. The court is aggrandizing its own power. It's engaging in power grabs in both cases. In the case of Chevron, it's not saying that therefore anything the president does, we're not going to approve of it. It's just saying we're the ones who have the final say, not the agency itself. And so it's putting a court intermediary. The court is now the one who gets to decide if there's an ambiguous statute, whether this is a reasonable regulation or execution of power. And so that's a court aggrandizing its own power. And it's also a generally deregulatory mode, which fits into their conservative ideology. That's one through line. And then in the case of the immunity, obviously in defining the scope of what is or what's not a presumptively immune or even core executive power, the court is aggrandizing its own power, and it's the final say on what those things are. So that's the through line.
Well, to clarify too, so what Kyla's talking about is Project 2025, at least in its initial conception, relied considerably on executive authority, particularly with respect to its constituent agencies, right? This idea that under the unitary executive theory, that the president would be able to assert much more control over the so-called semi-independent executive agencies. And what she's saying is something I've heard before, which is, okay, Chevron actually undermines Project 2025 because it helps neuter the executive branch agencies. And my explanation was what Pisco said, which is actually no, it just transferred, any ambiguities in federal statute, instead of total deference to executive branch agencies, these things would be litigated or decided by the court. And right now, the highest court in the country is pretty Trump friendly. So I think the threat of Project 2025 is still very much there because, as he says, the court would have the final say. And in this case, it's a Trump friendly court.
They're going to
disagree
stamp
with
everything that
Pisco's analysis a little bit. I would say the through line is one to what Pisco said, which is that the lawyers are declaring that they know better than experts, which is a little bit of a power grab by the judiciary. But I think the more sinister thing is kind of what we were discussing earlier, which is the idea of extending this type of immunity to executive agencies, whereby they're just going to do it. They don't care if the court substitutes its own judgment. Obviously, they'll be happy when the court substitutes its own judgment in a manner befitting their viewpoint. But they're also planning, if the court ever switches and becomes more of a liberal court, they can just outright ignore it. And then, as we were discussing earlier, there's really no contempt. There's no recourse. You just have to deal with the fact that the guys with the guns now get to do whatever they want.
I don't see that as a through line. Can you explain that a little more? Like what?
Yeah. So the idea
is kind of asking about the ideological consistency of the court and what people are saying about it.
The ideological consistency is that we are going to give broad immunity to the executive so that it can act in such a way that we want it to, and we'll co-sign it as the courts when it befits us to do so. But in the case that either A, the executive changes or it remains in democratic control, or B, the court substantively changes, there's a counterbalance system that allows them to still go either way, right? So if you have a democratic executive that is doing things you don't want to, the court doesn't have to defer to their agency interpretation now. The court can substitute its own judgments or its own interpretation and its own expertise.
Yeah, I understand that. That was my point.
And then the second half, which is the flip side of the coin, which is that, let's say, for instance, you have a liberal court that is being very constrictive, then you can have an executive, let's say a Donald Trump executive, that just does it anyways. And because there's broad presidential immunity, there's no recourse.
That's not contained in the opinions. What you're saying is like,
which is why I started out with, premised on the idea of what we were talking about earlier, which is that there's going to be a natural expansion of that to the executive agencies themselves, right? Obviously, if it doesn't get that far, your line of reasoning holds more truer, but the idea is I think they're trying to prepare themselves for regardless of the outcome.
Well, I think if you have a liberal court, it solves a lot of problems. I think you would reinstall Chevron, overturn this case, find some way to test it and to overturn it. And I think you should reinstall Roe and reinstall all these other precedents that got rid of it. I think there is no issue in my mind, given how the court has behaved in doing that at all. And I've been in favor of expanding the court since 2017 because of what the Republicans did, and even more so now. And it serves practical purposes.
How many seats do you want to have? Because how many seats do you want to expand it to? I'm so curious.
Two additional seats to
25.
start, and I think we can graduate it up by
Why
up
not
to
go
the
back to one
mid
seat
to
per
high
circuit?
mid to high teens.
Wouldn't it be 13 at this
why not-
point
why
based
not one
on
seat- one seat per
population and
circuit?
natural expansion?
I think it's
So do you want
Yeah.
the court? Are you saying you want the court to somewhat represent like the population capital, like each seat represents a certain number?
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the court's caseload is too much, and they're slow as hell in cases, and they take like 70 of thousands of cases every year, and so it's not fast enough. The court is too slow. There's too many cases, and it's a problem. It's bogging us all down.
People
And additionally, the partisan skewing of the Republicans merits a skew back. And so obviously I wouldn't be in favor of this if Trump were in office, and that's not inconsistent to me at all.
So to explain the 13, it's not necessarily population based exclusively. What it represents is, as the population of the country has grown, there has been a historical, I guess you would say, precedent of the court expanding as the country gets older and more populous. And so if we were to go based on those metrics historically, we would be at 13. One of the other reasons why I've heard 13 is because of the fact that it would allow for basically 6 on, 6 off, that you could have an off season, because right now we have the October term and we have the winter or the summer term. And this would allow them to fill the gaps between with a full court, maybe one person rotating in full year, that then would allow them to hear cases year round and put out opinions on a much more consistent and faster basis.
Boom.
Well, Steven's back. Steven, at this point, do you support any changes to the court?
I mean, not really,
Based. No, whoa, dude, are you serious? What would it take for you to be in favor of expanding the court?
Dude.
Basically, I'd have to be convinced that our system of democracy is structurally failed, and that now in a failed state, we need to consider other forms of government, and a packed court would be like on your way to those other forms of government.
Do you find it at all persuasive? Does it make you feel better at all? The idea that the size of the court has changed over the years. The founders changed it multiple times for actually pretty nakedly political reasons. Like
when was the last time it was changed?
Civil War era, you know.
No, it
but I mean, it
doesn't
happened.
any better. No.
Oh.
Well, I
Even
understand
though
this. Like,
Congress
at a certain,
explicitly has that power.
Well,
At least Destiny's consistent props. Careful. For anybody that, when you hear me, I have to scroll me your shit. Okay, you would be part of the reason why I would consider packing the court. Okay, so because conservatives would do it. It's not, you guys aren't above it. Just to be clear, don't delude yourself into thinking it. If you even for a microsecond think you would drink bleach, because you absolutely would be in favor of it. If Donald Trump suggested packing the court, you guys would be running around on your hands and knees trying to slurp up the load of whatever judge you think he'd put on there. There's no shot. You guys have zero principles or zero engagement to any part of anything that has to do with this country. Don't ever forget.
You want
that.
to know what I fully expect? I expect the conservatives, should Trump win, to float the idea of expanding the court.
Why? They
Why?
have a solid. They have a heavy 6-3 majority on it. They don't need to expand it.
They already did.
Because they absolutely get the talking point that they're, oh yeah, we agree with liberals, we want to totally expand the court, and then they get to control the expansion by saying, oh, we're only going to expand it by 2 seats, and that way any subsequent push by Democrats is going to just, they can argue it's going to overload the court, it's going to be too many people, or we've already addressed this and they have their opportunities to fill seats as seats become vacant. I think they'll absolutely try it.
That would be a shockingly bad political calculation.
Why? Put 2 more conservatives on the court, so it's an 8-3?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because at the end of the day, what rulings are you going to get from an 8-3 court that you're not getting from this 6-3 court?
Yeah,
And
there's no reason to do it. It's such an unnecessary risk. Yeah.
You've just given the Democrats like even more justification to be like, well, you guys just added 2 more seats. Well, now we're going to add fucking 10 seats. Who gives a
I
shit?
think it would be the opposite, which is, we've already added seats. Like, we're not going to keep adding seats to the Supreme Court just so one party can win over the other.
No, here's the more likely scenario. Here's the more likely scenario. It's possible, increasingly unlikely, but it's possible that President Biden will be reelected. But it's also unlikely that Democrats will keep the Senate. We're slated to lose that. So there's a scenario out there in the multiverse where Biden wins reelection and the Senate is in Republican hands. Then the question becomes, let's say either last year in office, but let's not even do that because that's an easier answer. What about in his second year in his final term? There's a Supreme Court vacancy. Would a
Republican Senate will never put a Democratic justice to a vote. I just need you to hear this, and I'm going to say it one more time. a Republican-controlled Senate.
Well, not for a lame
will
duck
not
president. Why would you ever do that? The American
forget lame
people
duck.
should choose.
No, newly minted,
Wait,
35-year-old. I'm gonna
No,
get this
you're
out.
not true. This isn't true, Pisco.
Yeah,
I don't think it would happen.
No, wait, hang on a second. Are you, Steven, have you watched this movie? Have you been paying attention to anything around
Steven's
you?
right,
I feel
Pisco.
like you need to wake the fuck up.
Yeah.
You need to wake.
This is the Pisco that was 3 months ago was saying like, oh, actually, I think it's really important that we appointed a special counsel to investigate Biden's documents that he left in his garage, by the
Hang on,
way, so that we can maintain
wait,
the
wait,
illusion
wait.
of it being fair and balanced on both sides. And like,
Hang on,
Dusty,
no,
why didn't you
not-
cover
hang
that
on.
Biden told the special counsel that he couldn't remember where he put his shit? Like, that's really fucking important right now politically.
Nice-
and now you're saying,
nice touch.
have you been paying attention to anything, Dusty? Yes, I have been.
Steven, you need to wake up. And I'm about to respond to what you just said. You just said,
Wake up.
because I was in favor of a special counsel into Joe Biden's potentially criminal acts, because there was evidence of that. You understand that, right? I know you haven't read the Her report, and you don't know about the extent of evidence against Joe Biden for violating the same statute that you support. Donald Trump. Yes, less evidence, obviously.
Hold
less
on, wait.
evidence.
I'm sorry. The indictments around Trump's Mar-a-Lago case were centered around that. Now I know you might not have read any of the indictments. Maybe you
espionage
said the majority of the things that Trump are facing for the Mar-a-Lago case is obstruction of justice.
One
And
of the
him
majority
obstructing
charges-
one of them, yeah, but the obstruction charges are all, and the retainment of defense thing is not one of the things that Biden was facing. I don't think it's fair to characterize them as the same.
Are the vast majority of Trump's charges in the Mar-a-Lago case Espionage Act violations? Yes or no?
I don't think they're for retaining the willful retention of documents in the same way that Biden was facing those charges. It was for
How
defense
about-
secrets.
Try the exact same statute. They're both national defense information.
Yes,
you don't know
they
shit.
are.
You're pretending. It's okay.
Hold
It's
on,
okay.
wait.
You didn't read it.
Biden
It's
was
fine.
charged.
You didn't read the Her report.
Wait. There are charges for Biden of a crime.
There's no charges. Stop. They were investigated for the same exact crime, and they're both serious crimes. The retention of national defense information. Do you agree those are both serious crimes?
They are, but I don't agree that that's why Trump was being investigated. I don't think that the record shows that either. But
that Joe Biden. Wait, let's start over. Do you think that Trump should have been investigated if it was released or revealed that he withheld national defense information, regardless of the obstruction? Should he have been investigated?
it would depend on why he withheld it for the criminal statute to apply.
But you don't know. You just, NARA says, hey, guys, they gave us a bunch of documents and they're...
Oh, I would say the answer to that
should you
would be...
open an investigation?
No, absolutely not.
You should not open an investigation. That's exactly what happened. You understand that?
No, shut up, Josiah. That's not what happened. What happened was the request was made and he obstructed and ignored it for a year. That's what happened.
No. Sorry. He did not obstruct any... I understand what you're saying. He delayed, he didn't give it back. He did not obstruct like a subpoena or any like order to give over documents until later. But this initiation of the investigation occurred when NARA received its box of presidential records, found classified documents, talked to the DOJ, and the DOJ opened an investigation.
Yes, but that was after a year. He didn't respond to the NARA request immediately, and then they found it. This was after like 12 months of hassling.
Understood. So you think that it's the
my understanding? Let me hold on. Yes. This is my basis for the investigation. This is my understanding. Okay, and I might be wrong on the president, in which case I would change my opinion. But my understanding is that when a president leaves office, it is incredibly typical that a bunch of stuff ends up getting retroactively classified. A bunch of stuff gets sent back. I think this happened for Obama, and they go through it and they might request more. My understanding is that that process is ordinary when a president leaves office. So the idea that if this ever came up, that we would begin a criminal investigation if it happens seems ridiculous to me. Assuming the president and his staff are cooperating, returning whatever was asked for. That's not how it came up with Donald Trump, though. That, he just happened to send it back and they found it. It was the fact that it took so long to get it. And then once they found classified material, and then a request was made to open an investigation. And then when the FBI began communicating with him, he continued to obstruct and ignore it. That's when it escalated to everything
I disagree. I think the vast majority of the reason why an investigation was opened was because of the national defense information they found, and not because of the inherent delay into the NARA request. Agreed that plays into the narrative and what's going on here, but the withholding itself of national defense information is grounds for an investigation.
You think so? Then just to be clear, hold on. I would have to go back and look at the facts of the case, or we can do it together on stream, because that is not my recollection at all. But you're saying that if in day one, when NARA makes the request and Trump sends back every single thing that he had at Mar-a-Lago, and they find some defense stuff or whatever, that at that point, there's going to be an FBI investigation raid into Mar-a-Lago. At that point, everything happens the same?
I didn't say at day one. And yes, there's some threshold I'm not being able to perfectly define of the day being so small in the request or they giving away so quickly. But let's say that NARA, like a year into whatever's happening, sends a request, and like, so they didn't request right away, and they send it, a request in a year later, and they get a bunch of documents that are national defense information, I would be okay, even just as a national security matter or a counterintelligence matter, the FBI opened an investigation.
Why does the FBI have to be involved in a national security? Why does it have to be an investigation?
They have duties beyond just criminal enforcement, and if you don't know that, it's okay. That's okay if you don't know that. But they have a counterintelligence role and a role in protecting America beyond criminal enforcement.
That requires the opening of an investigation by the FBI every single time?
Why do you think they opened the Flynn investigation? Was that based on criminal stuff? No, it's counterintelligence. Based on
hold on. Tell me, give me the exact reason why the Flynn investigation was opened.
Because if you read the inspector,
don't tell me if I read. I'm asking you. I'm not reading it. If you want to link it to me, I'll read it on stream. But I'm asking you to tell me why was the Flynn investigation open. Okay, go ahead.
I know exactly what. Sorry.
Okay,
I know exactly how it started, and you're interrupting because you're nervous.
No, I'm not interrupting because I'm nervous. I asked you a question. Then you did this. If you read, I didn't ask to read it. If you want to link to me, I'll read it. I'm asking you to read
the report.
Okay.
The basis of the start of the investigation was George Papadopoulos' statement to a friendly. This is an Australian diplomat. And that was released to the FBI because this foreign diplomat told us. It's a foreign. He used to be the government leader of one of the parties in Australia. Told the Department of Justice, the intelligence community about it, and they received that information that they knew about the hack and were coordinating with Russia, and they opened up 4 investigations into 4 members of the Trump campaign that they thought most likely had ties with Russia. That included Michael Flynn, Carter Page, the campaign director name of Manafort, and one other who right now I'm not remembering. So do you agree that I knew exactly why they started the investigation?
So then
wait. Do you agree that I knew exactly? Yes or no?
Sure.
Okay.
But now I'm asking you, when they started that investigation, because you described it as, it was just counterintelligence or whatever. When they started that investigation, you're telling me that it started with a lead. It started with some other type of evidence from something else? That the Papadopoulos thing?
It was a counterintelligence investigation.
Yeah, but it didn't just materialize out of nowhere, right? It started with some other information found, right? Yes, okay. So then is your claim then that as an evidentiary basis that every single time somebody returns classified material, a president leaves office and returns classified material, that every single time there should be an FBI investigation after all of those things?
No. But I think if there's a sufficient enough duration between when they leave office, say for example, over a decade, or in Biden's case, maybe 8 or so years. If there's been 8 years since you were supposed to return him and we have NDI, why isn't that a fine basis to start an investigation? You should investigate it, shouldn't you?
I think it depends on the type of material, it depends on when it was classified, and it depends what the reason for the retention is.
How do you know that if you don't investigate? Is your position that they should not have investigated Joe Biden?
I didn't see a clear or good reason to, but my understanding is that that's not the standard way that these investigations open. Has any other president ever been investigated for retention of classified material after they transfer office?
I don't. Trump has been investigated for that.
Good one.
But I don't. Again.
Well, here. Okay, wait.
Vice President Pence was investigated. Agreed. Do you agree with that?
He's not a president, but this all happened at the same time.
Vice President.
Yeah, this all happened at the same time. Yes.
Wait. Okay.
But my question is,
random senator, would you agree with the investigation?
My understanding is that's not the ordinary course of things. So no. If it was the ordinary course of things, then yes.
Okay, I disagree. We disagree about the seriousness of this offense. Then.
Okay, wait. Do we disagree about the facts? Is it ordinary that when people leave office, oftentimes classified material is found afterwards and then it's sent back?
Yeah,
Does that happen?
I agree.
Okay,
that happens.
But you disagree. You disagree with the record. You think that historically all of those people should have been subject to criminal investigation before they should. That it was been handled wrong in all of U.S. history up until Donald Trump, and now they've gotten it right.
I think if there's a retainment of national defense information and it's a certain amount of time sufficient, I'm not going to define it exactly, but certainly more than 6 or 7 months. I think that's plenty. And in the case of Biden, it's more than that. The DOJ, the FBI should investigate it. Why not?
Because it doesn't seem to be in the ordinary course of things, and I don't know if this is like an actual undue burden in terms of how it plays out politically. For instance, stuff can be retroactively classified. It's incredibly common. Let's say that you have a storage facility and you're president, and for some reason, 10 years after office, you decide to move your shit. In the course of doing that, you say, "Oh wow, look at this! I have a box of stuff," and then you look in, you're like, "Oh shit, but this stuff might be classified now." I don't know. Maybe you call NARA, they say, "Oh yeah, it is," and then you ship it back. If you want to have a back and forth conversation, sure. But if you're saying saying in that circumstance, well, actually, there needs to be a
have
criminal investigation.
investigate. How do you know exactly what these documents are, whether they've been retroactively classified? By the way, NDI, it's not the same as like a simple classification system. And so if you read the Her report, for example, which you haven't, they will go into depth about the lengths they went to define things as NDI. And it was like an interagency process about defining what NDI was. That all results as, if you have an investigation of it. But I just want to get your position down clear. You disagree with an investigation into Joe Biden's retention of national defense information. You think the DOJ should not have investigated him?
Define investigation for me.
It's a binary because the DOJ can open investigations. So that means that they have some articulable basis to investigate.
Yeah, but I'm asking, like, let's say that the DOJ, let's say that they have a phone call to Biden and they talk with him, and then they send a few agents over to take a look at the place and see if there's anything else, and then that's all they do. And then they have another conversation, and then they quote unquote close it or whatever. Would you consider that like an investigation?
I would consider investigation if the DOJ formally opens an investigation. That's an investigation.
Is what I just said, would that require the formal opening of an investigation?
I don't think that talking to people requires a formal investigation of open investigation. What I'm saying is a formal open investigation, you assign people to it, and you understand the facts of what's going on. And if it leads nowhere, you close it. So I just defined it.
I don't know. So what I just said, it feels like you could say, okay, well, we're going to open an investigation on this. We're going to send 2 people over to check out his house and chat with him a little bit. And if they feel like everything's on the up and up, then they come back and it's closed. Would you consider that an investigation?
No. I think that the special counsel investigation into Joe Biden was fine.
Hold on. So do you think that does it always have to be a special counsel that's
with respect to the president for an investigation that hinges on criminal activity? I think that's appropriate. But even if you don't, that's a separate question. Should he have been investigated by the Department of Justice at all is the question, and you haven't given an answer yet.
Because I don't know right now what you're defining as an investigation. So, for instance, when NARA was making requests to Donald Trump to get stuff back and forth, was that part of an investigation or no?
No. A DOJ investigation exists when the DOJ says that they've opened the investigation.
But the DOJ doesn't always announce investigations. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's pretty atypical.
Internally.
So there's an email that goes out, or there's like a process, or
there's a system by which they ascertain. There's different level. There's like 1 or 2 different levels of the type of investigation. One that's like just an inquiry or something. Any of those 2, I forget the actual specific names, and don't call me on them right now. Do you think they should have opened a formal investigation of either the lesser kind or the normal kind into Joe Biden's retention of documents?
Based on how you define it, I don't think there's anything wrong with quote unquote opening an investigation in every single matter where classified material is found. Okay, obviously it needs to be followed up on. We need to find out why it was left where it was, and to make sure that there isn't any like leak or whatever in terms of like, well, this information got to somebody else. I think that's probably generally true.
And therefore you agree
but
that there should have been an investigation into Joe Biden.
If you're saying that there has to be...
yes or no?
If you're saying that there has to be an open investigation every single time classified material is found, and then the results of that investigation and everything peripheral to it one, it has to be special counsel, and 2, it has to be published for every single thing for the public to see. I don't think there's a compelling reason for that. No.
Okay, so okay, we can get to the special counsel, although I only have like literally a minute. So we can't get to it. But you at least agree that there should have been an investigation into Joe Biden's documents?
I depending on how an investigation is defined by you, probably.
You weaselly
I'm not
little
weaseling,
fuck.
you fucking retard.
Probably.
If you're saying that you won't define an investigation by FBI going to somebody's house, asking some questions, and then, having notes in a file, and then eventually saying, okay, nothing's here, and then it's closed. You're not giving me a clear answer if that's an investigation or not. If you call something like that an investigation, sure. But that's not my issue with quote unquote investigating this. The issue is when you open a formal investigation, you make the declaration publicly, so now you're causing political damage, and then in the course of that investigation, you're subpoenaing and investigating other things peripheral or tangential to the matter, so you're collecting other dirt on a person that may or may not be relevant to an ultimate charge, and then eventually you make no charges, you recommend no charges, but you publish the findings of that entire investigation to the fucking public. I would say no, that's probably not a good
Trump in the Mueller report. Just like
what?
Trump in the Mueller report. Trump and Mueller report. All those special counsels into other matters. Mueller report. Remember that?
If the Mueller report was started improperly, if stuff relating to FISA warrants, for instance, was obtained in an improper manner, then I would say no, the contents of that should never be made public.
Those FISA warrants, some of them were improper.
I think one of them was, and the impropriety was a joke.
Multiple reauthorizations were improper. They did not give all the material information to the FISA court. So you agree that by your own logic,
I would
you
have
could
to
not
go
released
back.
the Mueller
I
report.
would have to go back and read that. That was not my recollection. My recollection was that one of those warrants was said to be illegitimate, and it was because something was moved from the bottom of an email to the top of an email.
More than that. If you take Rob Noor's critiques as the recitation of facts, you're going to say dumb shit like that. It's way more than that.
Okay, if you wanted to present me that information, you could do it, but we literally read over this exactly. Like in the fucking, was it the Durham report, I believe? We read over the entirety of why that particular email was criticized. If you want, we can look it up right the fuck now
there's
why
more
that email.
omissions from those warrants than
Okay,
just that.
maybe there were other warrants then that section didn't go over. I'm not aware of those, but sure.
Okay,
But yeah,
okay.
but I mean, hold on. Wait. I think we would both agree, though, that if that investigation started off on bad grounds, then no, nothing should be published from that investigation. You don't want to create the standard by which you start a bullshit investigation and then publish the information that you find in the course of that investigation to damage political opponents. I think we both agree there, no?
I think there could be a public interest even if it was started improperly.
That's the most retarded thing I think you've ever said in your entire life.
Hey,
sure,
hey,
okay.
Hey.
Yeah. Just to be clear,
so
the final
upset.
position here is you can start an investigation in an improper manner and then publish the findings of all of that publicly because there's a public interest in. What are you, Julian Assange now, or?
So, like, I don't know what to tell you. There can be a public interest, even if there's some impropriety in the investigation, in releasing findings. I mean, you shouldn't release anything false, but releasing true findings about an investigation into the sitting president. And to the extent that there's like some things that are embarrassing, you should redact them and stuff like that, things that are not relevant. But again,
and you think there's a valid position that you can start investigations improperly, because why not? There's not a public interest in not having those started improperly, knowing that at the very least you can publish embarrassing information about the person afterwards?
I think that you should maybe use your discretion to close an investigation if there's like real big problems at the start of it and it's all bullshit. But if there's some truth to what's going on here, and there is some truth to what's going on with Biden, I don't have a problem with them releasing a special counsel report on what's going on. The answer to that is no, I don't have a problem with that. We can get into that later. I have to go. I have a podcast with Econoboy and friends. Hey, do not be upset. We have to elect a Democrat, and we can't be fighting amongst ourselves.
Listen, you started it, okay?
Well, because you think that the Republican Senate is ever gonna hear and have a vote on any Democratic Supreme Court nominee. That's crazy. The Senate Majority Leader won't even put it up to a vote if they.
Do you want to bet $100 on that?
$1,000 on it. $1,000. If there's ever a situation in which there's a vacancy under a Republican Senate and a Democrat's in office, they will not put it to a vote. $1,000.
Okay, 1,000. We've got it.
All right. Much love.
Be careful.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Jesus. Okay. We have a whole disagreements room full of wonderful chatters. Wait, hold on one second.